Hi folks, Simon here, back with you once again speaking about Final Fantasy IX. Square have plans for this entry in the franchise. They really do. I know I have been harping on about it for months, maybe even a couple of years now, but I truly believe that behind the scenes, Square are working on something big for FF9. So last year, about a year ago from now in fact, it was sort of rumoured that there was a Final Fantasy IX animated series in the works, and it seems that that is going to be confirmed and revealed this very week at the Las Vegas Licensing Expo. This has been announced in Animation Magazine. They spoke to the vice president of the company, the Cyber Group Studios, I believe it's called, that are working on this series. Now, we don't know any further details about the animated series, such as the art style. We don't know the characters, the story, the setting. All we know is it's going to be based on Final Fantasy IX. But if you do want to find out more about that particular series, then make sure you tune into the Las Vegas Licensing Expo. I do believe it's being streamed for free live online so that you can watch it. But really, this is all just begging the question, why Final Fantasy IX? What are Square up to here? Because over the last 18 months or so, we have just been hearing so many different whispers about something happening here behind the scenes. Now, maybe all of that was just leading to this animated series, but I don't know, guys, really? You know, are they just randomly picking Final Fantasy IX to do an animated series for out of all of their Final Fantasy games? They could have done an animated series on Final Fantasy VII. That's perhaps out of the classic games the biggest at the moment because of the ongoing remake. And if the animated series is the main project in and of itself, surely it would have made sense to have done it on a game that's already got a current active large fan base. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that Final Fantasy IX has its fans. I count myself as one of them, for sure. But undoubtedly, because Final Fantasy VII Remake exists, it has the most people talking about it right now. So effectively, I am convinced that this animated series for FF9 is serving a greater purpose. No, I'm not saying that because there's an animated series being announced, therefore a Final Fantasy IX Remake must be being made. What I am saying is that the animated series is serving as part of a cumulative case that as a whole is leading us to that conclusion. Don't forget, we've also been having official blog posts over the last few months where those who worked on the original Final Fantasy IX shared their experiences on developing and designing that game. Final Fantasy IX has also been the Final Fantasy game, at least from the PlayStation era, that has received the most attention from fans in terms of remastering and remaking the graphics from scratch. And some of the efforts that have been put out there for us to see look incredible, they really do. And there have even been rumours that some of the fans working on these projects, these unofficial projects, have been hired by Square to continue their work in an official capacity. And while, okay, that in itself may just be rumour, what isn't rumour is the Nvidia leak. The famous, perhaps to some infamous Nvidia leak, where they announced, they weren't supposed to, a whole bunch of games that were coming our way. Many of which nobody believed. It was not a credible leak, we were told, and yet virtually all of those games have come to fruition. Either they've been released or they've been announced. Kingdom Hearts 4 was a big one. Nobody expected that, and yet it happened. The Chrono Cross remaster, nobody thought we'd be getting that before a Chrono Trigger remaster, and yet it happened. And the one game, or there's not many, but one of the games that has still not been announced on that leak was Final Fantasy IX Remake. So yeah, a Final Fantasy IX animated series isn't proof of anything beyond that, but it does add fuel to the fire. Now, I can already hear the objection, oh, but Simon, you fuzzy-fingered person, why would there be a Final Fantasy IX remake of all games? What about Final Fantasy VIII? We're just going to skip from 7 to 8? Why would a Final Fantasy IX remake even happen and be announced while the Final Fantasy VII remake is still in development and is probably going to be so for years to come? And to you, I say, well, yeah, okay, fair enough. Those are some valid questions. And obviously, I'm not a Square employee. I don't have any official answers. But there's also, I would perhaps point out, quite a few assumptions in those sorts of questions as well that may or may not even be true. First off, why assume that Final Fantasy VII Remake development is going to take many more years? Maybe Square have had enough of it already, you know? We're all assuming there's going to be all these parts and episodes to be released. Maybe the next part 2, will be the last. I'm not saying that it will be. I'm hoping that it won't be. I'm just saying you never know, okay? We expected a load more content for Final Fantasy 15, much of which had been announced. And then Square scrapped it all. A lot of the Final Fantasy VII Remake content we were expecting hasn't even been announced yet, so technically it can't even be cancelled. We just need to wait and see what happens there, but we don't know what's going on with the development of that project, so let's not assume anything just yet. I'm not saying that Square are planning to not complete the story for that game, I'm sure that they are. I'm just saying it may not be in however many parts you think it might be in. It might all be done and wrapped up by the next game. But even if Final Fantasy VII Remake is a project that's not going to be completed for the next 20 years, we're going to be on episode 5 or 6 by that point, I don't know. Maybe Final Fantasy IX Remake will look so different to Final Fantasy VII Remake that Square won't see it as competition for themselves. My own suspicion is that the Final Fantasy IX Remake project will look closer to the original game than Final Fantasy VII's remake looked to its original game. I think we will be getting the same isometric viewpoint, but it will be in fully 3D rather than with the pre-rendered backgrounds. It would be a remake and not a remaster because all of the assets would have been recreated from the ground up, but it's quite possible that it won't have the word remake in the title. It might just have another subtitle to differentiate it from the original game, but without confusing people into thinking it's going to be something similar to FF7R. My only point here, of course, being that a Final Fantasy IX Remake could certainly potentially complement and not compete with the ongoing development of Final Fantasy VII Remake. But if we are getting a Final Fantasy IX Remake, then why have Square decided to focus on this game and seemingly skip out Final Fantasy VIII? Well, first of all, I just want to point out I don't think that needs to be answered in order to justify the potential existence of a remake, because it's clear Square are focused on Final Fantasy IX. That's why it's a Final Fantasy IX animated series that's going to be announced. So the reasons as to why they're skipping out on 8 are irrelevant to the fact as to whether or not a remake for FF9 even exists. But if I had to have a stab in the dark and guess, I'd say it was a business decision more than anything. As somebody who is a fan of 7, 8 and 9, out of those last two, there's just no question that Final Fantasy IX is the more popular. Final Fantasy VIII had its issues and it had its detractors. A lot of people were unhappy with that game, and it experimented in ways I think that didn't really pay off in the way that Square hoped it would have. I'm not saying that Square will never do anything with Final Fantasy VIII. I mean, they gave us a bit of a lazy remaster, which was something a couple of years ago. I just don't get the feeling it's their priority right now. But in terms of an announcement for a potential Final Fantasy IX remake, I'm thinking it might not be far off, seriously. We have the 35th anniversary of Final Fantasy this year. Square are pretty much going all out, pulling out all the stops. I'm not saying that we're going to be getting an announcement in 2022, but I think a lot of people are going to be surprised if we do, and I won't be. I'll leave it at that. But as always, folks, I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on the matter. Are you excited for the Final Fantasy IX animated series? And what do you think about a potential Final Fantasy IX remake coming our way? Is this something you would like to see? Please do share your thoughts down in the comments. And for more Final Fantasy news, rumours, and just my general thoughts on the whole franchise, make sure to stay tuned to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like on this video if you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.